So this presentation will be recorded. It's going to be uploaded to our YouTube as a resource for social workers and social work students across New York, usually, across the United States as well. So I just want to give you a reminder that this will be recorded and not to share, any information that you wouldn't want posted on a recording on YouTube as well when there is that opportunity to have dialogue. So those are my main administrative announcements. So I won't take up any more of our valuable time. I'm going to hand it over to, and I forgot to ask you to say
Alisa.
your last name, but
Yeah.
Alisa, is it Chirico?
Chirico.
There we
Yeah.
go. For our presentation tonight, a clearing in the forest environmental social work in concept and practice. So thank you so much, Alisa, for leading this chat, for connecting social workers on this topic. We're really excited to hear what you have to share with us and learn from you on this topic. So thank you so much.
Thank you all so much. I'm so happy to be here. I want to start with some gratitude to Elaine Fridfret, who is the chair of the Western New York Division of the NASW, for inviting me to give this talk. I'm absolutely tickled to be here. My voice is a little bit weird. Those of you who know me, thank you so much for coming. I sound a little bit weird, so my voice might give out. I have a cold that I'm recovering from. But I'll do my best to carry on. I'm going to talk for a little while, I'm going to aim for 20 minutes. I'll take a break for questions and then I'll resume and then we'll break again for questions. But that's the way that I kind of want to structure things. And so let's begin. Let me go to my presentation. Let me share my screen. That will help if I do that first. There we go. And let's be grateful together for Canva. All right. So here we are. Who am I? My name is Alisa Chirico. I have a bachelor's degree in comparative literature from Binghamton University. I have a master's degree in landscape architecture from Cornell University. And I'm currently working on my master's in social work here at the University at Buffalo. I see some familiar faces, colleagues, professors, family. Thank you all for being here. And without further ado, let's look at our overview. First of all, why environmental social work? We already have so much on our plates as social workers. So we'll start there. Then we're going to look at some things from the ground up in the Southern United States. We're going to look at some threats to indigenous stewardship. We're going to look at anthropogenic climate change as a real problem. I assume that all of us here are aware of that, but I'm just going to cover that just to be sure. And then finally, we're going to end with fireflies, eco-poetics, and our universal birthright to beauty and aesthetics in the landscape, things that come from the landscape, as well as how we're going to be able to work with an awareness of the environment as social workers. So I'm just going to go over why are we talking about environmental social work? Well, because eco, bio, psycho, social is too long. So biopsychosocial model is a model of social work. Now, I've written all of these definitions as I understand them, with the exception of the social ecology framework. But biopsychosocial model is just an awareness of who we are within our social context, who we are within our psychic or mental health, and how our physical health is a part of that as well. The environmental piece just allows us to be aware of how the environment plays into our well-being as well. Human geography is a really cool study. It's basically a study of geography, the way that people move through space throughout time. It's really fascinating. Social ecology is related. Basically, more crisis oriented, I would say. Ecofeminism relates the subjugation of women to the subjugation of land. So it's just sort of a feminist lens for understanding the landscape and the environment. And then environmental justice is a really important framework for making sure that we all of us have equitable access within the landscape, access to resources, and that we all have healthy environments that we live in, and that goes for everybody, people of all abilities, all genders, all sexualities, all races, all religions, all creeds, all ethnicities. Every single one of us is covered under the umbrella of environmental justice. So how did I get into this? a long time ago, I don't even remember when, I saw this map of demographics of the town that I grew up, Elmira, New York. This is a town where on field trips, sometimes you go to a cemetery that was once called Helmira. It was a prison war camp um, back during the Civil War. A lot of really horrible things happened there. And the demographics of Elmira are pretty mixed racially. But looking at this map, you can see so the blue areas are predominantly white. The black, or the green areas are have a predominantly Black population. Those two green areas are the two correctional facilities in Elmira, New York. And that is, to my mind, an environmental justice issue. It's incredibly problematic that most of the people, or at least that disparity is so clearly seen within the community of Elmira. It is also economically segregated. But what you can see here is that the Elmira Correctional Facility and the Southport Correctional Facility, this one's a very rural area. And then the Elmira Correctional Facility so we're looking at a diversity score. So equity, diversity, and inclusion are really great things really great metrics to aspire to. However, when the most diverse areas in a city are its prisons, that really underpins how that's not necessarily enough. So we have these other areas surrounding that are predominantly white, only a tiny bit diverse, but the lower income areas and the areas that surround the prisons are the most diverse areas. And so that's part of how I became interested in basically environmental equity. Rolling back, some people might have a question of how does landscape relate to our well-being? How does this have an impact on our societies as a whole? I saw these maps a little while ago and I found them incredibly interesting. Basically, what you're looking at here on the left-hand side is a geological map of formations that took place millennia ago when there was an ocean that approached what we now know as the Appalachian Mountains. And there was a recession of that ocean, leaving these deposits in what became very fertile soil over time. This soil was fertile enough that it became prime areas for cotton plantations. Of course, in America, we have a legacy of enslavement, and basically some people, Black people, were able to stay on some of those plantations, as we'll see in the next slide. But this geological imprint was visible in the election results of the 2000 presidential election. There's a little bit of 2000s humor there for you. This particular geologer called it the Cretaceous Homoclinal Arc of Demography, which he abbreviated to CHAD, if you remember the election of 2000 and the hanging chads and the debacles of that. And so there's a few more maps here to illustrate the same point. So you can see that same arc here. The percentage of farms operated by tenants, so that would have been the Black tenants um, uh, during the year 1910. You can see very clearly that arc overlaid. Moving over to today, or the 2000s, Black only population. So we're looking again at segregation within the landscape. And you can see here too how some of that declination of the soils and the fertility sort of led to a little bit of a diffusion of that Black only population. But you can see very clearly here that this is almost entirely white here. And then looking at something also very potent is looking at the percentage of persons below poverty level. Again, those highest percentages, 40% up, they are in this arc. And then looking at the white only population in contrast to the Black only population is also illustrative. So how does this relate to social work? So I went over the head of the NASW, sorry, but I'm looking at the International Federation of Social Workers for a broader view of how we should be operating in the world as social workers, as global citizens. So there's a few things here that I love the clarity of the IFSW. So I'm citing from two different documents here. I'm citing first from the global definition of social work and from the social work and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which were developed together between the United Nations and the IFSW. So the first quote here is that the unfair paradox is that those who often suffer the most from global failures, maldevelopment, and negative effects are the ones who usually contribute the least to these societal and ecological ills, and this is known as environmental justice. This is destabilizing for individuals and their communities. Such global challenges underline the need for global transformation. Social workers understand sustainability as patterns and policies that establish long term solutions for the well being of the entire ecosystem, including both humans and nature, for current and future generations. Social work is a practice based profession and an academic discipline that promotes social change and development, social cohesion, and the empowerment and liberation of people. And that, again, is universal. Finally, principles of social justice, human rights, collective responsibility, and respect for diversities are central to social work. Underpinned by theories of social work, social sciences, humanities, and indigenous knowledges, social work engages people and structures to address life challenges and to enhance well-being. The above definition may be amplified at national and or regional levels. I couldn't have said any of that better myself. Um, so going back to this, the unfair paradox of the environmental injustice, something that I found very interesting is that this sort of black belt or the blue belt, as it showed up in the electoral politics of the year 2000, this black belt also follows this line of the Mississippi River and also goes down into New Orleans, this lower area of Louisiana. So this connects to that environmental injustice. So this map here is a map of New Orleans and what's called Cancer Alley. So this is where some of my landscape architecture continues to come in. So point source pollution is a single identifiable source of air, water, thermal, noise, or light pollution. And Cancer Alley is a place where you can see all of these little dots, every single one of them along the Mississippi River is some form of intense point source pollution. This map is from Kate Orff, who is a landscape architect who's amazing. She does like fantastic regional work at the regional scale. And so all of these power plants, all of these polluters, they all increase the risks of cancer along this highly densely populated area along the Mississippi River Valley. These forms of pollution tend to happen in spaces that are populated by people who are of lower economic power, who don't have the community power or the know-how to advocate for themselves, or if they do advocate for themselves, they're ignored and they're spoken over. And money talks. Um, so this is a way in which hydrology, because the way the industry operates is that it often operates along riverbeds, along riverbanks. You can see that also in Cleveland with the river that the name escapes me right now. But that river was on fire in the 1970s until the EPA came in and cleaned that up. So we have historically, since the Industrial Revolution in this country, really abused our air and our waterways. And the Mississippi River is a prime example of that. And the way that that has a negative impact on the people who live there is readily available, readily seen in rates of cancer that exist in those areas. And if you're interested in looking to see how that might manifest itself in your area or in an area that you are interested in, this is a really fantastic map. It's interactive. You can click on it, zoom in, zoom out. You can actually see what those point sources of pollution are in cities and areas across the nation. And I was actually really surprised that there weren't some higher scores here in Buffalo. So it just goes to show that I feel that it goes to show that it's not overblowing the very real risk that exists. And the other thing is that this is not what a swamp is supposed to look like. A swamp is supposed to be lush and verdant. This is a mass die-off of a swamp because of this pipeline that runs through it, because of continuous abuse of the landscape. And here we see the various different carcinogenic and other toxic pollutants that are put out by these industrial manufacturers, many of whom are producing um, petrochemicals, since it is close to oil fields in the Gulf of Mexico. Rachel Carson and Silent Spring. It's a wonderful book if you're interested in the topic. A seminal book, basically speaking to the right to make a dollar at whatever cost is seldom challenged. So a little bit more from the IFSW. I apologize for the text-heavy nature of the slide, but the idea of collective responsibility highlights the reality that individual human rights can only be realized on a day-to-day basis if people and corporations and industry uh, take responsibility for each other and the environment, and the importance of creating reciprocal relationships within communities, realizing and respecting the interdependence among people and between people and the environment. This is also very important. Social work embraces first, second, and third generation rights. First generation rights refer to civil and political rights, such as free speech and conscience, and freedom from torture and arbitrary detention. Second generation rights refer to socioeconomic and cultural rights and include the rights to reasonable levels of education, healthcare, and housing and minority language rights. Third generation rights focus on the natural world and the right to species biodiversity and intergenerational equity. These rights are mutually reinforcing and interdependent and accommodate both individual and collective rights. Moving on to the ways, more ways in which the United States has failed to uphold those rights through colonialism and apartheid. This is an image. Each one of these here is one image of one bison skull. And you can see how just the scale of this in one location, the mass decimation. So I live in a city called Buffalo. We're named after this animal. The Buffalo Bills are actually named after one of the guys who killed a lot of buffalo. Um, we have an interesting legacy of naming things in this country. But there were 30 million bison that roamed the plains of the United States for millennia, literally for millennia. Native peoples here, they evolved alongside the bison. They were intrinsic to the landscape. The extermination of bison was specifically a method of colonization, of ethnic cleansing, and of apartheid that the United States Army didn't even have to take on for itself. Private people actually began to take on the killing and the massacring of bison, riding on trains through the landscape, shooting out of trains to kill as many bison as possible, leaving them there just to rot and decompose. This was just part of the legacy of disease that Europeans inflicted on the native beings, on the native people, cutting off people from food, clothing, shelter, tools, cultural identity, forms of medicine and fuel, and ornamentation and beautification. These are all matters of personal identity um, that are really intrinsic to who a person is, and who a culture is, and who a people are. Um, Interestingly, in 2019, President Obama declared the American bison the national mammal, the only creature other than the bald eagle to be declared a national symbol, which is interesting because in the 1970s, we also saw a decimation of populations of the bald eagle, which has just recently been delisted from the endangered species list due to regulation by the EPA. This is a really beautiful, one of the earliest films um, that we have is of this bison running. I'm not going to go into it right now, but the people who relied on the bison for their food, for their shelter, for their clothing, they were the tallest people on the planet at one time. And today, those people, those the remnants of those people now are, oops, sorry, are now more impoverished than most other Native American nations, which is really saying something because most Native American nations are generally impoverished as a result of generational trauma and a legacy of harm that Europeans committed when they came here. Colonial environmental destruction is a continuing issue. Right here we can see an olive tree. I don't know how old this olive tree is, but many olive trees individually, many olive groves in the Middle East are centuries old, dating back to Roman times, my Roman Empire, if you will. Colonizers in Palestine regularly practice the destruction of olive groves on a massive scale. Um, in the year 2011, roughly 2,000 olive groves had been destroyed. This destruction of the trees creates greater soil erosion on the landscapes where they had been inhabiting. The soil in Palestine is uniquely set up to support very few forms of plant life. Olives, citrus, and certain other plants such as za'atar, which is a spice, are plants that thrive in this location. They are endemic to that land. And to wage war on a plant is something that an indigenous person would never do. Um, Basically causing desertification, releasing harmful gases when you burn a plant, and then also losing the ecosystem benefits of olive trees. Like I said, citrus groves are also under similar attack and have been for decades now. Um, Palestinian people are prohibited from harvesting native za'atar plants, which require regular harvesting in order to thrive. Um, just like the decimation of the American bison is a form of violence against the economic, food, heritage, and cultural identity systems of the indigenous people. Palestinian people have centuries old production and economic systems of food, olive oil, creating soap, creating fuel, and creating cosmetics. Here you have a woman who is weeping over an olive tree. So this is a product of destruction. This is not a product of harvest or care. Um, One of the things that Israel continues to do is to plant pine forests in place of olive groves as a method of colonization and settlement. Um, the olive tree is the material and symbolic signification of the abject native that must be eliminated in both land and body. And this, to me, is a manifestation of ecofeminism, understanding how the body, how is subjugated in under the patriarchy, under machines of war, under machines of capitalism. One of the other first things that really clarified this particular um, struggle for me was looking at maps of the Dead Sea. So water is a recognized human right under the United Nations Declaration, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Um, and one of the things that has been happening under settler colonialism in this area is the rerouting of water from specific communities, so corralling communities, and then diverting water from those communities. Um, so this right here shows the Dead Sea in the year 1972. Um, and then here we have in 1989. So here we can see at the bottom the very beginnings of what are called evaporation pools. These also exist in other areas of the globe as well, notably Chile and China, places where there are arid locations where the water is very saline and has a lot of various chemical compounds. So in Chile, you have a lot of lithium deposits, which we extract, or which certain industries extract to create lithium ion batteries, potassium salts, and then other materials as well. But these evaporation pools work on the principle of creating a shallower area, dividing it up, and then allowing that water to evaporate into the air so that the mineral deposits can then be harvested and collected. And so this is when this is starting. So this Dead Sea used to reach all the way down to here. And now you can see that all of this area of water is essentially being um, channeled into a commodity, into production of chemical commodities, and leaving only this much water, which you may also be able to see here. This level of water has receded as well. The Dead Sea is very deep, so you don't necessarily see so much of that topographical change, but it is changing on a level of about 4 feet per year, which is very significant. So there's all this water that's very deep. So it doesn't necessarily show as well from the aerial view as this does, but it is still real and significant. And one of the things that happens when you extract water, so part of this is due to climate change, but most of this is due to heavy extraction and heavy use of water in an arid climate, where the Dead Sea has not been evaporating for centuries. It has been sustainable for centuries, and currently, because of this extraction of water and evaporation of all this water, you wind up with a land that is no longer supported by groundwater. So you have a vacuum there as the groundwater sinks, creating things like these sinkholes. Here you can see some of that coastal declination of the water. And here, this man is a Russian tourist at an Israeli hotel, and he's enjoying his beautiful experience in the water. So I mentioned climate change a little bit. Let's see, how are we on times? Okay, I'm gonna go ahead. Yes. Nicole, I'm just looking at the chat really quickly. Um, so I believe, Nicole, that you're talking about, I'm imagining that you're talking about the bison. That picture really upset me a lot. Yes. Yeah. Um, just like for what? For what? For this. Um, but thank you for that. So, I did speak a little bit about climate as it relates to the evaporation in the Dead Sea, but I'm gonna just really quickly go over a bunch of different images and maps. Here we have, so recently, this image comes from phys.org. So these are a bunch of physicists who I trust physicists. I don't know if you do, but I do. Um, they basically have been able to figure out back to 60, 70 million years before the present day what the global temperature was. Now, they did see also that some of this variability here in since zero CE, the past 2,000 years, basically noting that there's a lot of variability here, but it's more localized variability. So global temperatures didn't didn't fluctuate very much. It was more localized. Whereas here we're seeing that this is, very high temperatures, and then coming back down to basically the times of human civilization, or our concept of history essentially. And these are the earliest ice core records that we have. And then, so these are different geological eras: the Cretaceous, the Paleocene, the Eocene, Oligocene, the Miocene, the Pliocene, the Pleistocene, the Holocene, and what we live in now is called the Anthropocene. So this is a time of anthropogenic change. This is a time of the sixth greatest extinction in our planet's history, and we live in it. What a time to be alive. But what we are seeing now is that basically the polar ice sheets are melting. We're looking here, and what we are on track for in a business as usual scenario is that by 2300, which is a long way off, but it's coming. But within this really short window of time, we will be at temperatures that haven't been seen on this planet for 50 million years. And I think that that is terrifying. So that's just something to just have in the back of your mind, keep you up at night occasionally. But that's if we do business as usual. We do actually have a lot of mechanisms in play, which I will be getting into shortly. Um, But these are just some manifestations of the changes that may seem small and may seem larger. If you're like me, you may remember childhoods with tons of snow, building snow forts. I haven't built a snow fort. I could have built a snow fort last year here in Buffalo, but I don't know if too many other people across the United States could have done that in the past 5 years or so. The last time that I built a snow fort was when I was in college, so 2007, I think. But every year is warmer than the last. Every year is within the hottest 5 to 10 years. And we can see how that's manifesting through these maps that the USDA puts out every 10 or so years now. These are the plant hardiness zone maps. So these maps measure the lowest yearly temperature that each region reaches on a given year over an average of those 10-year temperatures. So this map is a little bit of a different language than the previous one, but you can see how if you were to look at one area and look at this key, you could see how it's slightly different from the 2012. So this is 1990, and then we have the 2012 USDA plant hardiness zone map. Um, Here we have Buffalo, New York, which is where I am, which is green. And then here we have the 2023 USDA plant hardiness zone map. So the USDA just put a new map out. Here are some interesting little statistics that you can, or information that you can look at about Arctic ice and the instability of it as it is now, um, as opposed to how it's been for a very long time. But looking at these two maps, I'm just going to go back and forth really quickly. You can see that using the same scale of colors, um, you can see that there's this magenta color, this really lovely, like, there's a lilac and then there's this warmer pink color. That color no longer exists. That's 11 years later. These areas in orange are all areas of the United States that have changed their half zone. So here there's a little bit of green over here in the Southwest where it's gotten a little bit colder, which is interesting. But for most of the nation, I think this is a roughly 50%, 40 to 50% coverage of the United States has seen a measurable change in our hardiness zones, which means that there is a measurable change in the plant matter that can grow on a yearly basis. Sometimes that's good. So sometimes gardeners are like, well, I really wish that I could grow XYZ plant. And now we can do what's called pushing the zone. So um, now you can ostensibly grow a fig tree in Buffalo under protection, whereas maybe you couldn't have done that 20, 30 years ago. Um, and that's true for a lot of other plants. Um, there's one plant that I really love. It's the Eastern redbud. Its zone of indigeneity, it sort of is on the sort of Pennsylvania border, but now you're able to see more and more of those growing in New York State as time goes on because they are prolific. So those zones are changing and flexing through time. And this has a really real impact on our food systems, on our cultural aesthetics, on disease for plants. We know that maybe we don't all know, but there's the spotted lanternfly, which because of climate change, there are ticks, which again, because of climate change, these are insects, these are invasive insects that can proliferate in areas further and further north than before because of climate change, because the landscape has become a little bit more hospitable. We're not reaching those same deep freezes that we have for a really long time. That's evidenced as well in the fact that more than 70% of Arctic sea ice is now seasonal, whereas it used to be we used to have what was called a permafrost. There is a lot less permafrost on the globe than there used to be. Um, and what do we lose when we lose entire ecotypes? So this is a closer up map of the state of New York. I apologize to my Californians who are here. I didn't give you the same attention, I'm sorry. But here we have a map of the state of New York. And you can see again a little bit closer up this colder -40 to -30 degrees Fahrenheit that no longer exists. That's not there anymore. And now we're reaching our coldest temperatures are -30 to -25. So what that means is that there are animals, there are ecosystems that are shrinking and disappearing as time goes by. It also has an impact for recreation. Anybody who skis knows that skiing locations are farther, but the opportunities to ski are farther and farther apart. And often the snow that's being created has to be created. It is not, it's artificial snow. There's machines, it's not natural snow, which skiing is maybe not like the most potent example for all of us. It's not the most accessible sport in general, but it shows that this has effects for all of us, including the ultra wealthy. I'm just waiting for them to understand and realize that. They do already realize that it affects their wine production. So it's just a matter of time. So what do we lose? So here we're looking at how different animals are losing and plant life are losing some of their ecosystems. But what happens in um, on a planet where there is more climate catastrophe? We create something called climate diaspora. And so thinking again, so remember those maps earlier of who lives in this little belt here, and who lives here along the Mississippi River in New Orleans. So people who lived in the city of New Orleans are now members of this massive climate diaspora that exists across the country. You can see that they're settling mostly along that arc of places where there are already populations of predominantly Black people. But they're also moving up into this Mississippi Valley. So, they're also coming into closer contact even than they were before with areas of increased other health risks. So not only was Katrina a disaster in and of itself, it creates these ongoing ripples through time of displacement, of loss of personal cultural heritage, of material loss, of loss of life, of loss of health, of loss of sense of safety, of groundedness. So, what are social workers here to do? And I'm gonna see if it looks like okay, nobody's in the chat. Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure that I was giving people an opportunity to ask any questions that they may have. Oops, let's go back here. So, what are we here to do? Let's see, we do have something in the chat. Oh, thank you. Oh, Mark Miller, hello. Thank you so much for sharing that. I appreciate that. So, Mark Miller, who is one of my professors from long, long ago at Cornell, he shared um, something that I'm excited to look at for climate analogs for 540 cities in 2080. So, thank you so much for sharing that. I open that. Let's see if that's gonna, yeah, we'll just put that in the background for me. Thank you. So what are we here to do as social workers? We are here to connect people with resources. We are here to provide a safe and skilled container for individuals' healing, so therapeutic modalities as well as resource provision and connection. We are also here to investigate those resources and those healing modalities for whether or not those modalities are effective. And then we are here to identify missing and inadequate resources and to advocate for the provision and the continuity of the ongoing provision of those resources. This is a little formulation that I made up. Um, Basically, the experience of self, class versus ecology. So, not everybody can be or can feel like an empowered actor within the environment. And this is what I call the experience of self. Um, some of us have an internal pressure for survival, an internal pressure to put food on the table, internal pressure to survive, internal pressure for housing. Some of us have the external pressure. So once we reach, the middle classes, arguably, once that internal pressure for survival has been satisfied, we have this external pressure for social performance. So I'm not going to do things unless the people around me are doing them. I'm not going to do things unless my kids' access to a really fancy school um, is compromised. And I'm not going to compromise my kids' access to a really fancy school by speaking out about something that maybe I care about. And then we reach this other echelon of people and economic wellness in class with zero sense of pressure. What I call an all-consuming blob. So just kind of lugging out, like, I want this, I'm gonna take it. I want this, I'm gonna get it. I want this, I got it. A crisis of character, a sense of entitlement, a sense of limitlessness, but not in the good, I'm one with the universe way, but I have no limits. There's nobody can tell me no. I can consume as much as I want to. And within this framework, I just want us to remember a couple of things. One of those things is that compassion is key. So if I see a homeless man or a homeless person littering with what I've just given them, I'm just going to say, hey, next time, just don't do that. That doesn't help any of us. But to be compassionate around, what people feel empowered to do, what they don't feel empowered to do, with their needs, and allowing people to really meet their own needs as necessary. Speaking truth to power is also key. Having conversations with these people. I've definitely had conversations with people who think that I have a chip on my shoulder, and I'm okay with that. I'm okay with them thinking that I'm wrong. Because maybe somebody else will also speak to them. And it would be good for me to speak in a way that is more easily receivable for them. But I do think that it's incredibly important for us to speak truth to power. Connection with ancestral knowledge is connection with sustainability. So we have populations of people who are disconnected from their agrarian roots for many reasons. We have people who are disconnected from their textile weaving roots for whatever reason of colonialism, etc. But being able, having the ability to reconnect with that knowledge, to be able to have the knowledge of how to grow food for yourself and how to be okay with that and feel the empowerment of doing that, that is a sustainable act. That is a resilient act. Divesting from systems of industrial production is always sustainable. And there are very few of us who can say that industrial production is somehow close to our hearts and our health and our well-being. Diversification of the ways that we create food, create beauty, create resources, that is a form of resilience for communities and for ecosystems. So there's these three things that I believe really strongly. Knowledge is power, money is power, but land is sovereignty. If you have land, you can grow things. You can only do that if you have knowledge. It's really hard to get land if you don't have money. But those three things are really, really key. And that's why I think that it's really important for us to preserve land, to take care of land, because everything starts from the ground up. So, how do we expand our conception of social work? So, looking first at this one program. So, I think that it's really important. So, as social workers, we do those things. We find resources and we connect people with resources. We provide containers for therapy. We provide safety. We provide modalities. We investigate. We think about what's effective. We think about um, uh, how we can be safe for other people and how we can expand the people, our cultural competency and who we can provide care for. But there are multiple ways to think of ourselves as social actors in the world under this environmental umbrella. And one of these programs that I find really fascinating, and if you've been in any of my classes, you've probably heard me talk about this program. I love them so much. They're out in California, so shout out to the Bay Area. But this program is called Planting Justice. This is their logo, which I love. And they have a program wherein they speak to or they don't speak to, but they work with incarcerated individuals while they are still incarcerated. They begin to teach them systems of permaculture, growing food. They connect them with a modality that is both healing. It provides job training and security and stability, and they provide them with jobs once they are no longer incarcerated. And California has a 44.6% recidivism rate. So that means that 44.6% of the people who are in California who are incarcerated are going to be incarcerated again in the future. Their reentry program with Planting Justice, which is a basically reentry into society program, has a 0% recidivism rate. which is totally wild. So here they start on the inside. They work with San Quentin State Prison before they even make parole. By the time they leave prison, they already know they have a job waiting for them with people they trust, people they know. They stabilize that transition. They provide living wage jobs. This is maybe an old statistic on that, but it's higher than Oakland's minimum wage, and that is what I see this regularly, but as a therapist, knowing that I can provide as much therapy as possible, but what people often really need in our society right now is money. And being able to provide that for people really is a way that this program does take care of people. And this is only one of their programs that they have. They work with a lot of community organizations, including the prison, including schools, including land trusts locally. But they have this really wonderful website where you can purchase. They have a very large plant nursery. They also have community gardens. They have a multifaceted system that is really beautiful. And I love this program. It's called Planting Justice, and I find it really inspirational. And I also find it's very effective at what they're doing. And if we as social workers are working on being trauma informed and providing reasonable care for people who are dealing with trauma or complex trauma or mental illness, the best way to do that is to heal cycles of trauma and to keep it from happening in the first place. And I think that this program is doing a really good job of that. I was lucky enough to recently go to New Orleans. I loved it there. I'm going to go back. But I went to the first thing that I did. One of my dear friend brought me first thing. I landed, dropped off my bags, and then we went to this community farm called Speakeasy Farm. Now I have a plot at a local community garden, Grassroots Gardens, which I love, and I love it there. So I love being able to see multiple models of that. Let's see. Elaine Renfret says this is an amazing program that respects the people's ability to change with the assistance to do so. I wonder how much the prison industry wants to incorporate programs like this. I don't think that the prison industry does want to incorporate programs like this, at least not the for-profit prison industry. But I think that's a really great question. But thank you for that. I really I donate to them, not enough, but I do what I can, and I really should talk to somebody there because I really love their program, and I get a lot of inspiration from it and what I hope to do for myself in the future and for my communities in the future. But this farm was really lovely. So they have every Sunday they have publicized open farm days. So open hours to do. They have this lovely little list of tasks that need to be accomplished. The one that my friend and I did was we planted sweet William flowers where it feels good. So that was really lovely. One of the things to do is take a deep breath and walk around the garden, and we spoke to the person who was managing that day and facilitating that day. And she said, come anytime you want. If you just need a place to be outside that's free, which speaks to the dearth of what we call third spaces. And Okay, Nicole says San Quentin has more programming than almost any other prison. They have their problems, but are definitely a model. That's wonderful to know. Thank you, Nicole. I believe it because they're from the website you can see they are reaching out with dozens of other community organizations. So the outreach on that is really well balanced. Um, so there's this lack of what we call third spaces being spaces where one can go other than work and home that that you don't have to pay for, where you can just exist socially. This woman that we met spoke to that. If you just need a place to be outside, that's free. People come here to cry, whatever. It's for the community. And I think this is just so lovely. Um, I love that she spoke to the therapeutic aspects of the outdoor space, which is very real. So I was delighted to be able to have access to that. Continuing on with an expansion of our conception of social work, one of the things that we can do is incorporate sustainability and resiliency everywhere we can. Excuse me for just one second. So I My field placement right now is with an organization called Western New York Blood Care. It's a hemophilia treatment clinic. One of the interesting and wonderful things about the hemophilia treatment clinic setup is that because hemophilia is a lifelong condition, the social workers, the medical social workers there are able to provide lifelong care. So, an unmatched continuity of care in any other place that I personally have encountered within the social systems and social work. So, there's such a great continuity of care. And the hemophilia community does a really great job of taking care of their own. But one of the things that happens when you're a woman with hemophilia is that your menstrual cycles, all of your reproductive health, is all uh, amplified. So heavier flow. With that heavier flow comes a heavier burden of what is called period poverty. And under my the supervision of my field supervisor, we put together. Well, she suggested I put together this proposal for positive period packs. And what I did within this was I made sure to embed reusable materials, reusable menstrual care materials. So, including your usuals, so pads and tampons, but also period underwear as well as menstrual cups, and along with these other taking care of the full range, the full person, making sure there was education and support around the use of these products and how to take care of oneself, hygiene products as well as pain management products. So really attempting to take care of our patients in a really comprehensive way, which is the sort of mandate and the beauty of the way that hemophilia care um, is done. And really putting when I put this proposal together, making sure that there was a very clear economic um, incentive for those reusable products, which may on the face of them look to be more expensive, but over the long term are not only more sustainable, but are also more economically sustainable. So that is how I work. I just kind of get it in there a little bit. And then framing in the landscape and social work. One of my favorite landscape frameworks is Joan Nassauer's Cues to Care. Messy Ecosystems and Orderly Frames is a paper that she wrote that I really love. So some of the work that I've done in landscape design has been really messy ecosystem work, including post-industrial landscape restoration, which a lot of people cannot read that, so to speak. They cannot see that as anything other than weeds, but really it's to me it's beautiful, to a lot of people it's beautiful. It's a restoration project. But here you see this meadow, which for me I'm like, this is so lovely. We've got this beautiful understory, we've got a lovely canopy of these trees that are providing shade and habitat, and there's so much life in here, I can just tell. But we have what she would call an orderly frame, so this clean mown edge. And I think that framing is really important. And so I'm connecting this here with a feminist framework, which is the personal is political. And my proposed environmental social work framework is that the environmental is personal. So how do we have these conversations? Um, oh, Elaine Renfret says period poverty is an issue that I'm currently working on for women in my community. I will contact you. That's amazing. Nicole, happy to learn about speakeasy and planting justice. The Solitary Gardens project is, I'm so excited. I love New Orleans and I plan to go back. I am so happy about what you're sharing. And I'm going to open this and put that in my background as well. Thank you so much. And we're going to pop that down. So, how do we start this conversation? So, I don't know if this professor is in this chat or not. I love this professor. Um, but on the first day of class, when we're talking about like, who are we? What are we doing? What are we doing here? I was like, I have a master's degree in landscape architecture, blah, 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 blah. And this professor said, oh, so you're an environmentalist. A little bit of shade. And I I am an environmentalist. I think we should all be environmentalists. And so the way that I tucked that in to my final assignment for this class, which was a timeline assignment, was I went over a brief history of Atlanta. So let's see if we can zoom in here. So in the beginning, we have a recognition of a native population. We have a recognition of a forest land and how that began to be used as plantation grounds. There's a bunch of other cultural history here. We have a Civil War battle here. We have a recognition of Juneteenth. We have a recognition of opera, library, culture. We have a recognition of how the Atlanta prison farm began in that same forest, continuing a legacy of inhumane forced labor that was began during the use of this land as plantation grounds. You'll also notice this is backgrounded by an old map of Atlanta, which includes this forest. We go on to the Olympic Games on Weelaunee Forest land, displacing communities even more than they had already been displaced. And we also see, ooh, the Atlanta Police Foundation is formed. We see, oh, the Hunger Games was filmed here. Also featuring the Swan House, which is an example of opulent 1930s Southern architecture. Very beautiful building, but part of that legacy. The Atlanta City Design names the Weelaunee Forest in their planned urban ecology framework, aiming to support Atlanta's four lungs tree canopy to create the metro area's largest park. And we see some high homicide rates, interesting in conjunction with the Atlanta Police Foundation. So if we have a police foundation, why are we seeing an increase in homicides? That's curious. And then here we have the Nature Conservancy working to preserve 200 acres of the Weelaunee Forest, setting that aside. But then the mayor announces a future use of lands as a police training facility. Stop Cop City protests begin in 2021, which are ongoing to this day. People begin to live on this land, to inhabit it, and to protect it. And at a certain point in 2023, last year, almost a year ago to the day, local and state police assassinate climate activist Portuguesa Terran, whose name is still recognized by the Stop Cop City group. They recognize that person's name and recognize their sacrifice. So that's how I embed my environmentalism, because here we have a recognition of an oppressive police state system, which is not going to help anybody, embedded within the landscape. So providing the context, relating a social system to its environmental causes or outcomes, and also the other thing that I really like to do, and let's see if I can go to this really quickly, just a brief moment of Zen. Is it going to work? I don't think it's going to work, so we'll leave it be. But starting with what you miss, thinking of, so for me, I was going to play with some mourning doves. So when I was growing up as a child, in my youngest childhood, I woke up to the sound of mourning doves, and it was lovely and it was beautiful. Some of us may have been able to see fireflies all summer long. Some of us may have the foods that our grandparents made for us, or the gardens that they grew, or that our parents grew, things that are close and dear to our hearts, that are parts of the landscapes that we come from and love. And so it's, I feel like if we can always start from that point. You can always start with a question of why haven't I seen a firefly in a really long time? Or if I have, why did I only see it when I was on vacation in that one place? Those kinds of questions, starting from the personal, will only expand your awareness of the interaction between the societal mechanisms that we live under and the landscapes that surround us. Understand you may face criticism or minimization. Oh, you're an environmentalist. But that's okay. That's okay. You can be steadfast because you're coming at this from a place of love and care for yourself, for the ecosystems around you, and the people and the societies around you. And stop, collaborate, and listen. So right now, I'm working, like I said, with grassroots gardens. I also am working at the baby steps of a couple of initiatives in collaboration with some other organizations within the city of Buffalo, as well as within the University of Buffalo community. So I'm working with the University of Buffalo's chapter of the Association of Black Social Workers in conjunction with Grassroots Gardens for a summer gardening workshop, and then also the UBA-BSW and the organization that I lead, the Macro Social Work Student Network, we're working together with an organization called Western New York Trash Mob. And so we're going to be conducting a Juneteenth cleanup, street cleanup before the Juneteenth parade, and then also afterwards. So we're going to clean it up so that we have a clean and beautiful space to celebrate, and then we're going to clean it up afterwards if it even needs it at the end of it, to make sure that we leave it better than we found it. So collaborating with what's already out there is only going to strengthen your ability to be a positive actor. Our universal birthright, as I see it, is to safe, secure, and stable ecosystems and landscapes. That is jeopardized. We know that. But that's what we deserve universally. It's to ready access to the reasonable personal environmental aesthetics of our landscapes, including cuisine and nutritious food, to night skies. I saw maybe a year or so ago online, somebody said that um, one of his bucket list items was that someday he wanted to be able to see all the stars in the sky. And I think that is the saddest thing. I love the night sky. It's magical. And it makes me understand something about my place in the world. Um, so that I think is our universal birthright. Even if we don't always live in a place where we can see that, if we live in a place with a lot of light pollution and all the repercussions that that creates, I think we all deserve to be able to see a night sky regularly in our lives. Thank you so much, Jenna. I think I'm running over time. I'm so sorry. But I'm almost done. Thank you so much for being here, Jenna. Bird song, green spaces, including open spaces and forested spaces, whatever's regionally appropriate for you. And our universal responsibility is to maintain and respect our environmental settings. We cannot respect what we don't know. It's to preserve public access as appropriate and safe. Everybody deserves access as part of our universal birthright. If you are mobility challenged, there should still be spaces for you to have access. If you are older, you should be able to have access. Our responsibility is to be cognizant of the footprint we lay, to reduce our dependency on plastics that we don't really need, things that are finite, reducing that footprint as much as possible within our context. Again, I use a lot more water living in New York State than I would if I lived in California. Our responsibility is also to make accessible for ourselves and others experiences without undue pollution of air, soil, water, or sound, and undue barriers to the kinds of access and aesthetic experiences that we deserve. And finally, again from the IFSW, social work's legitimacy and mandate lie in its intervention at the points where people interact with their environment. The environment includes the various social systems that people are embedded in and the natural geographic environment, which has a profound influence on the lives of people. From an emancipatory perspective, this definition supports social work strategies that are aimed at increasing people's hope, self-esteem, and creative potential to confront and challenge oppressive power dynamics and structural sources of injustices, thus incorporating into a coherent whole the micro, macro, personal, political dimension of intervention. And finally, I just want to say one last thing, which is that, we can fight for reproductive justice. We can fight for accessibility. We can fight all for decarceration. We can fight all of these fights simultaneously alongside the fight for environmental justice and access and equity. But the fight for the environment does have multiple deadlines. They are unforeseeable, they are fast approaching. Many of them have already passed. I didn't even get into a lot of things, but I'm glad that you're here, and I'm grateful that you've shared this time with me. And I hope that this was useful, um, and I hope that it wasn't too depressing, and I hope that you enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alisa. I know that you might have said it was a little depressing. I think it was inspiring. I think it really expanded some of topics or just into areas that I haven't heard being talked about in social work spaces like quite so often. Maybe sometimes I'm in the wrong spaces, but this was such an engaging and informative presentation. There's a lot of thanks coming in the chat box. I'm gonna be quiet for a moment and see if anyone wants to has any reactions, any comments, or any questions. So I'm gonna hold for a moment, and if anyone wants to unmute, do feel free to speak up and ask a question or make a comment.
I definitely welcome any questions that you have. And I'm going to put my email address right here in the chat.
I
Um,
I see
I
Sylvia. Oh, sorry, Sylvia. I accidentally muted you. Sorry, you can
It
unmute.
it is me. Okay. Sometimes you feel so helpless with the way the environment is deteriorating. And so this is a little hopeful, to know that we can have a little bit of influence by starting in our own little environment instead of draining all our energy and saying, woe is me. So thank you for that.
I'm so glad, Sylvia. And I just put in the chat too. It's a book, it's a website, it's called Drawdown. It's very technical in some spots, but it outlines basically a lot of methods that we already have accessible to us. Some of them are a little bit over engineered, but some of them are really real methods that we actually have as a society that that we can use to help. Their goal is to reverse climate change. So you don't just stop on a road when you're heading in the wrong direction. You go back to where you wanted to be. So that's a book that I have found to be relieving to refer to sometimes. I'm so glad that it was hopeful for you, Sylvia. Thank you so much. Angela?
Thank you so much. This was an awesome program. I'm out of the Washington, D.C. area, and we just had an event, a closing ceremony on women in environmental justice. And it is an area that I don't think about very often other than picking up trash. And so I'm really getting educated and trying to, educate my students more about it. So I really applaud you, and I really appreciate you also sharing the other partnerships, such as the National Association of Black Social Workers. So I really applaud, your effort of making sure that you're encompassing those cultural aspects. It is just amazing, and I'm very, very proud of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Angela. That is so kind. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I think, you mentioned like, oh, just picking up trash. Personally, like, and this is a thing that a child once said, which was like, we do what we can do. Let's do what we can do. And I remind myself of that sometimes when I get overwhelmed. I overwhelm myself all the time. I was just like, I'm just gonna do what I can do. And one of the things that I do that I can do, I get overwhelmed when I try to pick up trash sometimes. And so I have like a rule where if I cross paths with it, I'll pick it up. I don't zigzag all over. I just take what's in front of my path and I take care of that. And so that is more than a lot of people do. And that's a really fantastic place to start. So thank you, Angela, and I'm glad. And if anybody has any questions, there's so much that I don't know, but I know a lot of people who know a lot more than me. So if anybody has any questions at all, I'm very happy to wake up tomorrow to, you know, 50 emails with questions.
Okay, we did
And
have
also,
go ahead, Alisa.
I was just going to say thank you to the people who like added links and stuff.
Yeah. I also think this was a really inspiring topic, really inspiring presentation. It kind of, maybe draws you out of for me, it drew me out of kind of the typical topics that I engage in. And I just glad that it has to do with nature as an Adirondack native. It kind of refocused me on some of those important things that I rely on every day, and I need to be more engaged in myself. So thank you so much, Alisa. Also, a big shout out to Elaine Renfret, who is our incredible division director out in Western New York. Thank you so much, Elaine, for connecting us with Alisa on this topic. I just want to thank everyone for joining us. This is recorded. It will be put up on our YouTube page, so it can be used as a resource, whether you wanted to share it with a colleague, a peer, with other social work students. This will be available, if not tomorrow, then definitely by Thursday on our YouTube. So thank you everyone so much for joining us. Thank you, Alisa, again, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great night. Take care.